Hello, this is Ryan LeClaire. This is my synthesis post for the Global Learning Project. My partner was Henry Moran. Um, I guess what I've learned through this whole project was just that, like, as just as Americans, we're not so different from other countries than some people might think. Because when I initially talked with Henry on the first project, we just sat down at the Eagles Nest. We had our sodas, and it was a just fun time getting to know each other kind of more, because I've had some interaction with him, but that's just through my friend who is his roommate. But I learned that he was where he's from is not, I guess, as far behind in technology than some people might think. They actually have like all the main technology up to date, from what Henry talked about, and it was real interesting just to find out. Like, I knew that not all countries were like kind of far behind, but I didn't really keep track of which ones were, I guess, up to date with the technology like America is. Um, and we kind of he also talked about how, like, when he came to Clarksville, it actually felt like he was going back in time a little bit, because there aren't as many like skyscrapers around here, and there aren't as many big buildings. Everything's just kind of small, and so that was actually really interesting to learn about. Um, and we also kind of talked about the like geographically all the stuff that happens, because he is from a place with like 5 volcanoes, and he still says that's like not that many volcanoes. And when I heard that, I was like, what? That's a lot of volcanoes. How do you deal with that? Like, shouldn't there be like a lot of shaking and a lot of being like worried that they're going to erupt? That was like my thoughts that was going on. But he's like, no, it's just volcanoes. Like, you don't really have to worry about them till something actually comes out of them. And that was actually pretty interesting, because there was, apparently, according to him, there was a lot of shaking that would happen, which I thought was like, I don't know how to deal with constant shaking. But then the further we got into the activities, we started to go kind of into one of my areas that I've talked about, of nerd culture. And the nerd culture is beyond just like America, and it's also not just the nerdiness like video games, but it's also, card and board games. But the card and board games don't have to be specifically nerdy, like Magic the Gathering, like I play, or Yu-Gi-Oh, which Henry has played Yu-Gi-Oh before, which has kind of like got him a little dip into nerd culture. But through like our activities, through the first activity where like I was the cultural host, we got to I got to show him a bit more of like, yes, the what most people would consider in-depth nerd culture. I taught him how to play Magic the Gathering, a game I'm very familiar with. Um, and then as we played, we just kind of talked about how it kind of felt to play, how different it was for him, and that's when he brought up that he had like played Yu-Gi-Oh before. And then we also kind of talked about some of the stuff that happened, that we talked about from the first part of the project, just kind of getting to know each other. And we talked about it more about like I guess some of the more like animals that were around, and how he didn't actually have to worry about like too many threats in the water, like sharks. And we actually thoroughly joked about like, oh, Henry, watch out for the sharks. But then when we got to the next activity where he hosted, we kind of stuck with the card game theme, But instead of like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh, we played Uno with his friend Luis, who joined us, and that was real interesting because I got to look at two different people's experiences on card and board games that are not from like America, and I thought that was really interesting because card games still bring people together, but they also have been affected like by their school systems. Like all of the card games were banned from like Luis's school systems, even though Henry was like, no, that's not actually that accurate, because like at my school system, where I'm from, I was able to have those games, but like Luis was saying, no, not at mine. They were banned, and I was like, oh, it's probably gambling. Can't do gambling because they associate all card games with gambling. Which I thought was pretty interesting. And then also we talked about like board games like Monopoly, and Louise talked about a board game from home that translated to Big Bang, which is like Monopoly, even in the fact that it ruined families. And just learning from them that whether it's nerd culture, just American culture, or like culture from El Salvador, Nicaragua, we all end up in like the same place, or we can all just end up being more similar than we would think we are, because we would still connect with each other by playing card games or board games, getting closer to family. And I just think that like we, with or without technology, with or without volcanoes, as long as we're like getting closer to each other and becoming more friends, everything's gonna work out fine. And that's just really what I've gathered from the Global Learning Project.